working in a large canvas, 48 by 36, starting with my very first step, which is using the acrylic carbon black, very messy container there. I put it in a container on my palette because it is so runny. I like to use it a little bit like ink. It's just got an amazing fluid quality to it. It really helps me work up my initial composition. So right now I am just adding, straight lines, trying to create some kind of an interesting composition, off-centered, kind of just playing with it. At this stage, I'm really not paying attention to what I'm doing. I'm just, it's a really fun time just to sit there and add strokes and marks and, playing around with a little bit of a composition, utilizing the off-centered rule of thirds. If you notice, I've got the heaviness is over on the top, side, and then the middle of the bottom. So I've got big wide spaces. This is when it's fun to just start doing some twirling around, making swirls, scribbling. This appeals to definitely the part of my brain that just is having fun and just not even thinking of things, just playing. I like lines, I like curves. I just am playing around, putting lots of different just strokes and scrapes and all of that. My next step, looks like, sorry, I'm going to be adding just a little bit more. I'm kind of running low on that. Let's see, yeah, so I'm just adding some more, scribbling around. It's amazing how fun that is, just doing swirls and scribbles and just playing. I'm creating texture, but I'm really in my right brain just not paying much attention because when you're down and you're right next to your painting, you're not looking back at it like I am now as I'm recording this. And so I'm really not paying attention to it. It's just, how do I create some dark shapes? Because this is going to help me with my contrast. Next step is I use some Liquitex gesso. I like the Liquitex. It comes in a squeeze bottle, so I can just squeeze it right onto my palette. It's a lot, it dries a little slower than regular acrylics, very thin, so it helps me mix with that wet flow carbon black and create some more textures as I'm adding white and bringing it next to the black, which creates some gray tones. And then as you'll see, I just add white, mix it, and then just add some more white. And really what I'm trying to do now is just to cover that canvas in shades of black, white, and gray. Do big broad strokes, fill it in. It's nice to be having a fairly large brush, but also being able to just to scrub it. This is a lot of scrubbing going on during this time period. My poor brush gets a lot of abuse during this time. Still playing around with just adding color, shape, spreading the paint around on the canvas. Not really paying attention, just the fact that I'm wanting to add white. So I keep adding new white onto my brush, and then as I mix it next to the black, it just gets it some more gray. If I want it to be a little bit lighter, then I try to add more white in certain areas. I'm using the various shapes I made as with my brush strokes, and then kind of creating some shapes with them. So I'm following the brush strokes I made. So I'm filling in the empty spots, and it creates kind of a fun visual. And during this time, I'm not really trying to look at any type of what it's going to look like at the end. I'm filling in spaces. You see, I'll just go from side to side. I don't really have much of a process. It's just filling in spaces. There's my little Charlie dog. Comes in and out, keeps me company every day. Paint on canvas, following lines. If you'll notice, during this time period, if you were to try to talk to me, it would be really hard for me to do it. Even as I'm watching myself do it, it's kind of hard for me to talk about it. This is the important part of being able to retreat into a place that's not really based on today or what's going on around you. It's based on just being in front, being in the moment, disappearing into shapes and brush strokes, and wiggling it around, and just disappearing into it. Art is especially this abstract expressionism art, is a time just to express what's going on inside your subconscious. Your subconscious mind takes over when you are in your right brain, into your artistic brain. When you're not trying to create much, you're just putting things up. It brings you back to your childhood. It brings you back to those feelings of finger painting, exploring. And it's a very healing time. It's much better than so many other ways to deal with stresses and to deal with pain or suffering, because all you're doing is disappearing in a world that's totally you. It's between you and yourself. No one else is there. No one else is paying attention. You're just adding textures, adding shapes and contrast. This is the time just to be dealing with dark, light, contrast, midtones. Trying to follow the round shapes. I'll add water to loosen it up a little. Don't use a lot of water, but a little just to loosen it up. See, I'm still going inside. Sometimes during this part, your brain says, come on, get on with it, get done. And that's when you stop. You say, no, no brain. This is just time for me to have fun, play. Every time I have to add paint, it's a time for me to kind of look at it, study it. Now up here, I wanted it fairly light, so I'm just going to add a lot of white onto my brush and try not to attach it to any of the black to create gray, so it's just white. Keep adding white. Just thinking, I want some highlights in here. I don't want it all to be dark. It's kind of fun to look back on it when you're from this viewpoint and watching it all come together, because when you're painting, you're not really paying attention to what's going on. It's just like, oh, I want to add some white there. I'm going to add some white here. Wiggle, wiggle, scrape, scrape. Trying to follow some forms. The wonderful thing about starting your abstract expressionism, painting in just shades of black and white, is your mind is not covered in complex colors and what looks good next to what. Right now, all you're doing is creating shapes, creating shades, contrast, light, contrast. This was fun. I just started scraping hard, give myself some muscles. Toward the end, I'm just like scribbling around. That's what's fun, is actually that little bursts of attitude when I'm doing that. It really works out some frustrations or anything that I'm feeling for the day. It's just like, ah, I'm going to scrub it. Using a smaller, oh, I love this one. This is my liner brush. Very long. And I just slide it into that black fluid and just start doing some more scribbling. This is when I start adding some lines, a little bit more function and form to the chaos I created earlier. So now I'm just looking at parts of the painting where it would be kind of fun to have a little bit more going on. So a little bit more detail. But I'm also just still scribbling a little, adding some. I like doing the grid pattern. It creates a little bit more of a form, a little more. It's just kind of a controlled chaos. Is the best way I can explain it. That's kind of who I am, controlled chaos. It's kind of fun as you're painting to realize what you're drawn to, what you really are, who you are inside. I've done so much experimenting. Abstract expressionism's the toughest experience I've had to try to learn because it is so right brain. You're really not paying attention to anything other than your subconscious is coming up. What a wonderful way to get to know yourself. No one needs drugs and alcohol, addiction to get to know themselves. It's not so scary. You're not that scary. You just give yourself the freedom to exist. Nobody around, nobody judging your work. You're existing, playing. Gotta work some detail up here. It's a little boring and too light. Some more grid patterns. If you notice, there's times that I'm doing nice little grid patterns, which is kind of controlled, and then I just start squiggling. Like, well, let's see what would happen if I squiggle over here. Trying to create a little bit bigger dark spot in that one place. Trying to keep my initial composition that I just very first started with, my very first stroke. It's still there. It's kind of that upwards down cross L shape thing. Now I'm going to use a little bit more of the white with my liner brush. Just get some white scratch marks in there. Gosh, I had no idea how often Charlie walks in and out. The gesso is a little thicker than the fluid paint, but I don't mind, a little bit thicker. The lines don't go quite so far. It makes it more scratchy. Love this brush. The fun thing about the liner brush is you can't control it. And so as you're doing things with it, it's there's not a lot of control there. So you just scratch, lines, shapes, run it around. Now I've got a little bit, I think it's a size 4 filbert, so it's a little smaller than the 10 I was using. And I'm just filling in shapes now without any paint. Just going through and working in the wet paint. Just smearing some things together, still adding a little bit of white. Now I get my spray bottle, which I absolutely love. This is what I do toward the end of my first step, and just start spraying. This is another way of creating random strokes with gravity and water. Just let it drip. This creates some very organic lines, much more so than just trying to control it. And I'll just spray on some wet spots, really wet spots. That's it for the first step. I waited until the next day to do the second step. You don't necessarily need to do that, but it's good to have all of the paint dry. This was the large filbert I was using. Maybe it's the middle one. Yeah, it's not quite as big as the one I was using. So it's a medium one. Looking at it though, it's a little, I'm going to go with a little bit smaller one. Another filbert, beat up filbert. I'll probably just go back and forth with different size brushes, especially when I'm at this point because I'm trying to fill in spaces now. So it's a little more controlled than it was at the beginning. A little bit smaller. So I'm trying to, this step is where I start putting more white paint on it to create more contrast. And then I'll end up using darks to create more contrast. But I'm giving it a little bit more form in this version than I did at the beginning. Still using, your artistic brain as you're looking at shapes and colors. or not colors, I keep saying colors. You're looking at shapes and contrast and lights and darks. But I'm utilizing the scratches I made as well as the drip marks, and I follow those as I am creating some form out of this chaos. So they may seem like random strokes that I'm making right now, but I'm actually following the lines that were created in the first step. This is still somewhat free form, but nothing like what happened yesterday with just scratching and wiggling, and this is giving myself a little bit more form. I noticed with the work that I like to do, the first step is where a lot of abstract artists will stay, just doing straight big forms and uh, and shapes. But with my personality, I actually have a little bit more need for detail. And as I was experimenting with doing my own abstract expressionism, I learned that about myself. That if it was too simple, I grew bored with it. And as I'm looking at art, I seem to be gravitating toward the art that has a lot of places for me to go with my mind, my eye, and a lot to study. And so I have found that doing my art this way, by giving myself the freedom of the free expression in the beginning and the lower palette of color, was very opening and freeing for that part of my artistic subconscious. And this part is a little bit, it's kind of fun. It's kind of like the paint by numbers. You still get to choose what colors, forms. If you notice, as I'm adding the white, it really does bring out certain shapes that weren't really there before that you just saw with drip marks. So it's fun to do random random white in different spots, and then it just brings out a form that you wouldn't have normally. So even though this is somewhat controlled, it's still very free. If you'll notice the way I approach my art, it's a mix of free and tedious. And the tedious part, sometimes other artists don't like, but there's something that fills the the part of me that needs constant stimulation in my brain, that part. And so as I do these small little steps and just pay attention to the way the brush stroke is going and filling in spaces and creating form, that really appeals to that part of my brain that enjoys details and enjoys subtleties. So as I've discovered the way I like to paint, I have a definite style where I do enjoy these steps where I'm just doing little bits at a time, and yet I've given myself a form out of the free flow to start from. And then I just go from there, adding more color as it goes, adding more detail. I'm listening to music right now, so you'll see me maybe wiggle once in a while, but the music I listen to actually also helps my brain go places while I'm painting. If I'm listening to classical music, it goes one place. I think right now I'm listening to Pink, and she appeals to the part of me that's a little bit more wanting to understand my role in the world. I think that's what this artist, Pink, has helped me with, is the anger and also the beauty of existing as a woman. So as I listen to her sing and I'm painting, my mind can go to places that I need to go. As you are distracting your mind with doing paint strokes, it's a very interesting place. Your brain gets to focus on anything it wants because it just comes in and out of awareness. So the music you listen to, what's going on around you, how you're feeling about the world, all comes out as you're painting in this more formulaic place where I'm filling in shapes. And it's interesting how your mind can go in multiple directions at once. I like to fill in the areas that the paint has dripped down. It creates some really fun organic lines when I just fill in between the drip marks. I find that this part of the process is still quite open and free because I'm not trying to make anything. I'm just playing with shapes, figuring out what I had created previously by creating just contrast. The minute you put a light color next to a black, it makes both of them appear more vibrant. So when you put a light white next to a black, it creates that drama and contrast. And doing it without worrying about color yet gives you the freedom to only look at the contrast.